This is your video presentation on Marketing 610 for Module 9. Things that are going to be covered in this presentation are reminders, review of Module 8, overview of Module 9, and tips for the final paper. So Module 8, we had a discussion on directed marketing or direct marketing. We certainly saw that direct mail is not dead, that it is still a valuable resource for marketers. We talked about IMC, we talked about messaging, we also talked about the importance of a call to action. The milestone paper was on creative strategy and marketing mix. You need to look at your IMC mix, creative strategy, and budget allocation. Reminders. Citation and references are needed, especially in your initial posting. One of your engagement responses can be to the instructor, and your final blog posting was due on Sunday. If you did not complete it, you still can complete it, although there will be a small penalty for late submission. Why is it better to paraphrase than quote? Quoting demonstrates that you can find a quote. Paraphrasing and summarizing can demonstrate that you understand the concept and you can put it into your own words. At the grad level, it's much better to paraphrase and summarize than to quote. Sources should be used for more than finding quotes, and that applies to both papers and for discussion boards. In Module 9, there are two discussions. 9.1 is on digital and social media, and 9.2 is on sales promotion. They're fairly self-explanatory. Your last milestone paper is due in Module 9. It's about media objectives, and you're going to include your IMC elements, your budget worksheet, and your calendar. You are also going to have to include two creative elements. That is actually have two creative elements. There's a list of 13 things that you can pick from. It is everything from radio scripts and TV storyboards to public relations to direct marketing to newspapers. So you get to pick what you're going to do, and you have to actually provide two of the samples of your creative work. Okay, final papers, as I've said before, this is a biggie. It's worth 600 points. It will be your first paper that has points associated with it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about writing, citations, headings, references, sources, best practices, and I'm also going to share some sample references. So writing. In APA, you cannot use you, your, first person, or contractions. I've already told you that it's much better to paraphrase and summarize than to quote. Superlatives are rarely true and difficult to prove. Examples are every, all, never, always. If you say something like, veggies will never do this, how can you predict the future? If you say that it has always been this way, can you go back and prove it? So try to avoid superlatives. Very is an overused and unnecessary word. If you put very in front of important, it doesn't make it any more important. If you put it in front of critical, it doesn't make it any more critical. If you put it in front of unique, it does not make sense, since unique is a word that means there's nothing else like it. So how could it be any more like that? Try to avoid phrases like in order to, use to, due to the fact that, use since, nowadays, use today. Try to avoid those unnecessary phrases, and oftentimes there is a blue line under it in Word. If you see that, look at it and try to fix it. Avoid generalities, the entire world, or something like, this is a great idea for veggies. Just at this point, it's an idea, so don't evaluate your own work. Check for the use of apostrophe. Companies means, if you're applying to veggies, it would mean it applied to veggies as a company. IES means multiple companies. Avoid unnecessary phrases such as when it comes to as well as, it goes without saying. Try to avoid ending sentences with a preposition in, on, to, from, for. Rhetorical questions are great if you're writing an English essay, but they're not good in a business paper. If you are saying according to, it is according to the author, if known, not the publication. So if you have an author, it's according to that author's name, not the Wall Street Journal, the Harvard Business Review. Check for wordos, cliches, and redundancies, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And do not start sentences with also or a numeral. By that I mean, like the number 4. You can write F-O-U-R, but you don't want to put the numeral 4. Wordos. These are words that are spelled correctly, but are not the right word. Sometimes they're underlined, sometimes they're not. Whether and whether. This one is one I see all the time, manager and manger. Since and sense. There and there, that's a biggie. Then and then, loose and lose. If you lose something, there's one O. If it's loose, there are 2 O's. Here and here, piece and piece. So watch for those wordos. Cliches. Last but not least, first and foremost, easier said than done in this day and age. The rest is history. Read between the lines. There are so many of them, I couldn't even list all the cliches, but they are not good phrases to use in writing. We use them all the time when we're speaking, but they are not good in writing. It is a bad habit to include cliches in your writing. Redundant expressions. I already mentioned unique with very, extremely unique. How could it be any more than unique? A necessary need. It's necessary or it's needed. You don't need both words. A new innovation. If it's an innovation, it's not going to be old. Past history. History is the past. You wouldn't have future history. 2 twins. That's actually 4 people. Twins means 2. Completely unanimous. Unanimous means everyone agrees, so you don't need the word completely. Redundant expressions are also bad habits to avoid. Citations. Use last name only and publication date in citations. Do not use the download date for the publication date. If no publication date is provided, use N period D period, which stands for no date. It is better if you can find articles that have a publication date, because that way you know it's not an old article. The download date is only used if you're using a retrieved on date. It is not used as the publication date. If you have a quote, and I've already said try to not have too many quotes, add the page paragraph number to the citation for the quotes. In our textbook, there are 2 authors, Belch and Belch. Both names have to be in every citation. If there are 2 authors, everyone has to be in both citations. Use all authors in the first citation. For 3 or more, afterwards you can use et, al, period, meaning and others. Use citation for anything that's new to you. If you read it in researching the topic, if you paraphrased it, if you summarized it, use a citation. It is better to oversight than undercite, because when papers go through the plagiarism checker, if there is not a citation, it does come up as being a problem that the instructor needs to look at to see if, in fact, there is a proper citation. Use sources for more than finding quotes, add the page paragraph, and a good rule of thumb, if you didn't cite it, if you didn't write it, you must cite it. Headings. You need to use at least 3 main centered headings. On this long final paper, you're going to need a lot more than 3 headings. Introduction, use the title of the paper, use veggies. You do not label the first heading introduction. Each major content area should have a heading, and you should have a heading for the summary or conclusion. Heading should be no more than 3 to 5 words. It's based on the topic. It doesn't repeat the directions. And you capitalize all the main words in the headings. You could use all level 1 headings for the paper, which are centered and bolded after the first heading. You can use level 2. You don't have to. You can't use a level 2 unless you've used a level 1. You can't use a level 3 unless you've used a level 2. I don't see any reason to use a level 3 heading. I used a total of 3 of them in my 150 page dissertation. You really don't need a level 3 heading. And yet they tend to confuse people because they have a different format. APA rules. I don't know why. I didn't make up the rules, but you can't use introduction as a heading. I would use veggies. You're not allowed to use UUR first person or contractions. I just talked about the headings. Citations and references must match. This is how I check to make sure they check. I go to the reference page. From the home page, I hit find. I type in the first word in the reference listing to make sure it's been cited in the paper. If you don't list the reference and the citation the same way, it's not going to show up. So make sure the reference and citation match. Remember, the citation for the textbook is Belch and Belch. The reference for the textbook is given to you there. And please note that on the reference page, the first line is the only one indented. And here's my example for 3 or more authors. First citation, black, green, and white. Subsequent, black et al., and then the date. Okay, so for your final paper, this is my suggestion based on the main requirements of the assignment. These are the headings that I would use. I got these headings from page 1 of the rubric, main elements for the final product. I'd use veggies as the first one. I would use industry and company review, competitive review, segmentation, targeting and positioning, communication objectives and budget request, creative strategy and IMC, specific media objectives, creative execution, summary, references. And as I said, they're bold after the first heading. I basically took this right from the main elements of the paper. Now, if I've said this before, as you start preparing for that final paper, and I would have someone starting to work on that in Module 9, this is a bear of a paper. You got to combine all the previous elements. Eliminate redundancies. Each section of the milestone paper should only be in the paper once. Implement corrections and suggestions for improvement from the milestones. Move graphs, charts, pictures, illustrations to appendices. Make sure all citations are on the reference page and all things cited are on the reference page. Several teams did not have everything that they had cited also on the reference page. Be sure to include all the elements are addressed, check the rubric, and confirm that you have followed APA guidelines. Appendices. These are appendices that I might put in. The IMC planning from Module 2, competitive review sample ads from Module 2, segmentation from 3, product positioning map from 3, objectives and budget from 4, creative strategy and marketing mix from 5, sample media planning budget schedule flowchart from 6, and your samples, your execution samples also from 6. The worksheets could also be part of your appendices. How to find them if you forgot. Course menu, then you go to learning modules, table of contents, assignment guidelines and rubrics, and then you find the competitive review, segmentation process, and media planning. This is a big warning. I am going to post an attachment with this message that is a sample paper. It is an actual paper. Do not copy any part of the sample paper. It's plagiarism. Teams should check each other as a whole team, will be penalized. If there's a plagiarism in the paper, there will be a major deduction. So you are going to have to police yourselves. Do not copy any part of the sample paper that I share with you. The sample paper, you can look at their cover page, look at their headers, their headings, their citations and references to see how they're done, and you will see all of their appendices. They had a lot of appendices from this group. The names are fake. The paper is real. I changed just their names. Everything else is as they submitted it. It's not perfect, but it's one of the best papers I've ever received for Market 610. By the way, I did get their permission to use it. References, make sure they match. Don't list a source as a reference if it's not cited. Don't cite it if you haven't listed as a reference. Use the publication date, not the download date. Titles of books and journals are in italics. Nothing else in the paper is in italics. Do not use the words volume, issue, and pages in your reference. I'll show you that in a second. List alphabetically, and if the authors on a work are not in alphabetical order, I happen to use black, green, and white, but if the authors were white, green, and black, you don't reverse it because the order of the authors on a published work has meaning. So you leave the order on the work the same, you just alphabetize the first word of each reference. All right, so here what I've given you are samples, and this is not how you write a reference page. You write it in alphabetical order. My references are alphabetical, but I've given you what it means. So a website without an author or publication date, you can see I use N period, D period. I have the page, and I have the retrieved. A website with an author and date. I have the author's name, I have the date. Again, I used Apple. There's the name of what was posted and my retrieved URL. A journal article, you can see that after the end of Harvard Business Review, I've highlighted it. I used 96, that's the volume. In parentheses, I have the issue number 1, and 142 to 145 is the pages. I do not use the words volume, issue, and pages. This is the correct format. I have a textbook for another class, an article from a journal website. I use the author, the date, the title, the name of the journal, and then the retrieved from. And then here is a reference for a book. Do not say what kind of source it is. It's just for demonstration purposes. Sources. Do not use Google unless it's a starting point. Google gets you into bad places. It gets you into purchase paper sites. It gets you into Wikipedia. It gets you into blogs. It gets you into websites selling services. It gets you into cheat sites. So be very careful using Google. Google Scholar is okay. Avoid dictionaries and encyclopedias, and be very careful of purchase paper sites. You may not think it is a purchase paper site, but if it is, it will come up on the plagiarism checker, so avoid that. 4C filter. As you review the paper, make sure it's clear, that I can follow your thoughts and it's well organized. Concise. You make the point without unnecessary words and phrases. It's comprehensive. It addresses all requirements. Concise is the way you write it. Comprehensive is about content. And cogent, it's based on evidence or sources. Best practices, do not just report, apply and analyze. Demonstrate a depth of understanding of course concepts. Use appropriate sources. Overview the topics, not the paper. You shouldn't be saying things like, in this paper we will. End with a summary conclusion, and probably the most important thing I can tell you to do is have at least one person in the group read it out loud before submitting. And this is not reading it silently for editing. When you read something aloud, you read what you actually wrote. If you read it silently, you read what you think you wrote. We are terrible editors of our own work, so it's really important that someone reads it aloud. That's how you're going to catch those wordos. It's how you'll catch all the other bad habits, is by reading aloud. Some final thoughts. Remember to include the development costs for TV and radio ads. If all you include is the cost for airtime, you haven't completely budgeted because you have to develop the ad. Be creative in developing your creative projects. Consider the primary competitors are not fast, are more fast. Good food served quickly than fast food. And good food served quickly is more things like Panera Bread, Au Bon Pain, Chipotle. The fast food is Burger King, McDonald's. And when I think about veggies, I think their competitors are not Wendy's, Burger King, and McDonald's. They're more Panera, Chipotle, Au Bon Pain, and restaurants that are similar. And Chipotle also claims to have fresh food from locally sourced. Think about how you're going to tell the veggie story. I don't know about you, but I love it when I go to a restaurant and the menu tells me the story of the restaurant, or it's on the placemat, or it's on the cups. I love bottles of wine that tell me all about the winery. People like to hear the story of the restaurant when it's right in front of them when they're in the restaurant. So think about how you can do that. And be realistic in your budget numbers. You know, television ads cost a lot of money, even in local markets, and make sure design and creative costs are included. Ask for help, not because you're weak, but because you want to remain strong. And if you have questions about anything on Module 9 or final paper, please ask.